Good morning, everyone. The topic for today's UG clinic is case presentation of cataract. It is a very important topic both for your theory as well as practical examination. Starting with the definition of cataract, as you all know, cataract is defined as any opacification of the human crystalline lens or its capsule. Classification of cataract is as follows. Etiologically, it is classified into the acquired type and the congenital type, and the acquired type is again classified into age-related, traumatic, drug-induced cataracts associated with systemic diseases such as diabetes mellitus, and secondary cataracts which are associated with another ocular disease. At your level, our main concern is the age-related or the senile cataract, which is further divided into the subcapsular type of cataract, that is anterior and posterior subcapsular, cortical cataract and nuclear cataract. This was the etiological classification. Another way of classifying cataract is according to the stage of development that divides the cataract into first the stage of lamellar separation, intumescent or incipient cataract, immature cataract, mature cataract, and then lastly hypermature cataracts. So lens is a biconvex structure with posterior surface getting more and more convex than the anterior surface as the age progresses. I've put a schematic diagram showing the lens for your better understanding of its structure. Morphologically, there are three parts of the lens: the outer capsule, the middle cortex, and the inner endonucleus or the nucleus. We will consider a case of senile immature cataract who has no other associated ocular pathologies or any other systemic disease. So history taking starts with identification. Identification is necessary to create a rapport with the patient. If you suddenly go and ask the patient about his complaints, he might get awkward and you will not be able to then elicit a proper history. Also, identification is necessary for keeping a track of the patient for follow-up purposes. So identification contains the name, age, address, and occupation. The occupation of the patient will also give you an idea about the occupational hazards, if any, he is predisposed to. After the identification comes the chief complaint. The chief complaint must always be written in chronological order. That is, the complaint which has a longer duration or has occurred earlier should always come first. In our case, we will consider diminution of vision in the left eye since 1.5 years and diminution of vision in the right eye since 6 months. Next comes the history of presenting illness or HOPI. HOPI must contain an elaboration of only the complaints mentioned in the chief complaints. There should not be any other new complaint in the HOPI. So HOPI comes under the heading onset. In our case, onset will be insidious. Duration will be left eye since 1.5 years and right diminution of vision in right eye since 6 months. Progression, usually for insidious onsets, progression is gradually progressive. Then whether the complaint is associated with pain or is it painless. In our condition, it will be painless. If the patient complains about pain along with diminution of vision, you must always suspect about an acute rise of intraocular pressure as occurs in acute congestive glaucoma, or there might be some inflammatory conditions such as acute anterior uveitis. Negative history, which is very important. Negative histories are usually asked to rule out the other causes presenting with similar complaints. So first is history of trauma. Why we ask the history of trauma is to rule out traumatic cataracts. So in our case, there will be no history of trauma. Then history of frequent changes of glasses. Frequent changes of glasses occurs due to change in refractive error, which occurs when the lens gets opacified. Hence, and frequent changes of glasses is also associated with astigmatism and incipient stage of cataract, keratoconus, as well as diabetes mellitus. So in our case, we will say that there is no history of frequent changes of glasses. Now, history of polyopia. What is polyopia? It is seeing multiple images. So why does it happen? It happens when light is refracted through wedge-shaped areas of hydration in immature senile cataract, as well as certain other conditions such as astigmatism, subluxation of lens, large iridotomies, etc. when the patient sees multiple images of the distant object such as the moon. So in our case, we will say that there is no history of polyopia. Then history of colored halos. What are colored halos? These are rainbow colored rings around lights at night. They occur due to prismatic dispersion of the light in certain conditions such as mucopurulent conjunctivitis, acute congestive glaucoma, and cataract. So in colored halos, you will be asked how to differentiate between the colored halos in case of a glaucomatous patient and in case of a cataractus patient. So the answer to that is the Finchem's test, in which a stenopic slit is passed before the eye across the line of vision. So in cases of glaucoma, the halo will remain intact, but only it will decrease in the intensity, whereas in case of a cataract or a lenticular halo will be broken up into segments which revolve as the slit is moved. So these are the points under the HOPI. Coming on to past history, any history of previous ocular surgery is important. Then systemic diseases, three main things which are important here is history of diabetes, hypertension and asthma. So diabetes and hypertension can lead to retinal pathologies, as you might be knowing, which are known as diabetic and hypertensive retinopathies. So in certain conditions, when these retinopathies are very severe, you should not treat the cataract first. You have to treat the retinopathies first. Why? Because even after the treatment of cataract, there will be no vision improvement, because majority of the vision will be gone because of these retinal pathologies and not the cataract. And also when you do cataract surgery, a lot of stress is put on the retina, and hence these retinal pathologies might become worse. Asthma is important because if the patient is asthmatic, you cannot give too much block to the patient. So in terms of anesthesia, the history of asthma is important. Then comes the addiction history. In addiction history, mainly tobacco chewing and alcohol. It is important again with respect to induction of anesthesia. If the patient is having an addiction history, long-term addiction history, the induction of anesthesia will be late in the patient. Examination. In general examination, you have to see pulse, BP and signs of pallor, icterus, cyanosis, clubbing and lymphadenopathy. For our patient, pulse will be normal, say 72 beats per minute. BP will be normal, 120 by 60 mm of mercury, and there are no signs of pallor, icterus, clubbing, cyanosis or lymphadenopathy. Systemic examination will be normal for our patient. Then head posture. Head posture is important to see because in certain conditions such as squint, there will be a head turn or a head tilt, and in cases of ptosis, there will be a head elevation. Then facial symmetry. Facial symmetry will be bilaterally symmetrical for our patient, but in cases of facial nerve palsy or Bell's palsy, facial symmetry will be asymmetrical with drooping of the angle of the mouth, etc. in the affected side. Then forehead. For all patients, like in our case, there will be senile wrinkling on the forehead. These wrinkles, if not present, you will have to ask the patient to shrug his eyebrows to elicitate the wrinkles. So you have to see whether the wrinkles are equal in both the sides. In cases of facial nerve palsy or Bell's palsy, the wrinkles will be absent or diminished on the affected side. Coming to the main part, that is ocular examination, we will examine each eye at a time, and I will also enumerate the pathologies of each part. Starting with vision, vision has to be checked for distant vision, near vision and color vision. Distant vision we check using the Snellen's chart, which you might have seen in the OPD. So for the right eye, I have considered visual acuity to be 636, which improves after putting the pinhole to 612. So here we are seeing that the visual acuity is not improving to 6.6. Hence, we can suspect a cataractus change in the patient. In cases of refractive error, after putting the pinhole, the visual acuity will usually improve to 6.6. In the left eye, the visual acuity is very low, that is counting finger close to face. For near vision, we asked the patient to read the near vision chart at 25 centimeter distance from the eye. As our patient is senile, he will be having presbyopia and near vision will not be perfect N6, it will be less like N18 or N36. For color vision, we use the Ishihara chart. Then comes the intraocular pressure. We measure intraocular pressure by using the applanation tonometry, which is the gold standard. But if in OPD basis where there is a large number of patients, we usually use the non-contact tonometer or the NCT. So the normal range of IOP is 11 to 21 millimeter of mercury. For our patient in the right eye, it is 16 and left eye, it is 12. Extraocular movement, we have to see extraocular movement in all 9 directions of gaze. For our patient, it is normal in both the eyes. Now, eyebrows and eyelids, it is normal in both the eyes for our patient. In eyebrows, there can be loss of hair in the lateral part of the eyebrows, which occurs in madarosis. In eyelid, the pathologies you can come across are stye or external hordeolum. There can be thickening of the eyelid margins, and upon pressing it, some cheesy toothpaste like material comes out. This occurs in the infection of meibomian glands, which is known as meibomitis. Also, there can be inward turning of the eyelids, which is known as entropion, or outward turning of the eyelid, which is known as ectropion. Now, eyelashes were normal for both the eyes in our patient. In eyelashes, there can be excessive lengthening, which occurs due to congestion of certain drugs such as prostaglandin analogs used in glaucoma. There can be misdirection of the eyelashes, and it can touch upon the cornea, causing a lot of irritation as occurs in trichiasis. Also, there can be deposition of white flaky material on the eyelashes, which occurs in squamous blepharitis. The eyelashes can also be matted with clear mucopurulin or blood-stained discharge. The conjunctiva. The conjunctiva has two parts, the bulbar conjunctiva and the palpebral conjunctiva. The part which we see is the bulbar conjunctiva, and part which is lining the eyelids and the tarsal plate is known as the palpebral conjunctiva. So it is important to see both the conjunctivas. The palpebral conjunctiva of the lower lid you see by asking the patient to look up and retracting the lower lid down, and the upper lid palpebral conjunctiva you see by asking the patient to look down, and then you have to retract and elevate the upper lid. So the pathologies which you can come across in the conjunctiva are conjunctivitis, where there will be follicles and papillae, chalazion, which most commonly occurs in the upper lid, and the infection setting in a chalazion is known as the internal hordeolum. So for our patient, the conjunctiva was normal. Coming on to limbus, for our patient, the limbus was normal in both the sides. Patients who have undergone previous cataract surgery, mainly small incision cataract surgery, will have a scar extending from 10 to 1 o'clock, which is the scar of the corneoscleral tunnel made in SICS. Then the cornea is to be described under the headings size, shape, surface, transparency, and corneal sensation. The normal size of the cornea horizontally is 11.7 millimeter, and vertically it is 10.6 millimeter, and the shape is a prolate shape, but you don't have to describe it in so much detail. You can just write that the size and shape are normal. Surface and transparency, in our patient we have considered that there is no ocular pathology, hence it will be smooth and transparent. But in cases of corneal ulcers, any trauma to the cornea, or any corneal opacity, the surface and transparency will be uh, distorted or abnormal. Then corneal sensation were present in both the eyes for our patient. For checking the corneal sensation, you have to stand laterally and behind the patient, and you have to make a thin cotton wisp, and you have to ask the patient to look ahead, and then you will have to touch the cornea from the lateral side with the cotton wisp. If the patient immediately blinks, then the corneal sensation is present. Coming to the anterior chamber is seen under the headings depth and content. So in our patient, the depth of the anterior chamber was normal in both the eyes. So for seeing the depth, ideally we need the slit lamp, and in slit lamp there is a specific grading which is known as the Van Herrick's grading for the anterior chamber depth, that you will have to learn for your examination. On torchlight, we can only crudely judge the anterior chamber depth. We throw the light temporarily and we look for the iris shadow on the nasal side. Coming to content was quiet in both the eyes for our patients. So content of the anterior chamber is basically aqueous humor. So in aqueous humor there can be reaction in the form of cells or flare. So these occur in situations such as anterior posterior uveitis or post cataract surgery. So there is again a classification for grading these cells and flare, known as the standardization of uveitis nomenclature or Sun classification. You will have to read both this classification, Van Herrick's and Sun classification, for your exams. Now coming on to iris, the color of the iris was brown in both the eyes, and the pattern was regular in both the eyes. Now the pattern of the normal iris is not smooth, it has crypts of furrows. If the pattern appears smooth, it is known as muddy iris, which occurs in iridocyclitis. Now very important, pupil. In pupil you will have to see the size and reaction, and in reaction you will have to see both the direct light reflex and the consensual light reflex. Now size, if you have not dilated the pupil, the normal size will be around 2 to 3 millimeter. And if you have dilated the pupil using some mydriatic agent, then it will be around 7 to 9 millimeters. So when the pupil is, if you have dilated the pupil, you will have to write that the pupils are pharmacologically dilated. Now next you have to see the reaction. You can see the pupillary reaction only in an undilated pupil. If you have dilated the pupil, you cannot comment upon the reaction. You have to simply write that the pupils are pharmacologically dilated. So reactions are two: direct light reflex, which you see by putting the torchlight directly into the pupil and looking for constriction. If it constricts, then the direct light reflex is normal. That is, if it constricts when you're putting the light and it dilates when you're taking away the light, the direct light reflex is normal. For checking the consensual light reflex, you will have to put your hand on the bridge of the nose and forehead, and then you will have to put the light on one eye and see whether the pupil on the other eye is constricting or not. If both the light reflexes are present, you will have to write that the pupils are reacting to light. Coming on to lens, for the lens you have to see the color and the iris shadow. So color in a normal non-cataractous lens will be clear, but as ours is a case of cataract, so we say that in the right eye I have mentioned color is yellow, and in the left eye I have mentioned that the color is pearly white. Now iris shadow is present in the right eye and absent in the left eye. In the next slide I will tell you how to elicit the iris shadow and how you see it and what are the conditions in which it is present and where it is absent. Fundus examination lastly. Fundus examination is done using the indirect ophthalmoscope or direct ophthalmoscope, or you can do it on the slit lamp using different powers of lenses. So fundus we examine under disc, blood vessel, macula and rest of the periphery. Since our patient is not having any systemic diseases or any other ocular pathologies, the fundus examination is normal in both the eyes. Eliciting the iris shadow is very important at your level. So what we do basically is we shine the torchlight from the temporal side and look for this black shadow of the iris on the nasal side. So iris shadow is formed only and only in cases of immature cataract, where there is some amount of clear cortex in between the iris and the opacified lens. So when the light is projected from the temporal side, it forms an image of the iris on the nasal side, as the rays of light have the clear cortex to pass through and form the shadow on the opacified lens. Now, situations in which iris shadow is absent are firstly in a clear normal lens where there is no opacification for the shadow to form. Secondly, in case of mature cataracts where the whole of the lens, including the cortex, the capsule and the nucleus, is opacified and hence the light cannot cut through and form a shadow. Thirdly, in cases of pseudophakia. Pseudophakias, you do not find iris shadow, you find another reflex which is known as the shimmering light reflex. So what happens in shimmering light reflex is you flash the torchlight into the eye and you see two images which are known as the Purkinje images, one formed by the cornea and one formed by the anterior surface of the lens. So when you move the light right and left, these two Purkinje images will move in opposite directions to each other, appearing as if they are shimmering. Hence the name shimmering light reflex. So shimmering light reflex is a sign of pseudophakia. And the fourth case where you do not find an iris shadow is in cases of aphakia, where there is absence of any form of lens in the eye. So this is the right eye and the left eye of our patient. So for commenting upon the grade of cataract or how far the cataract has progressed, we have to always dilate the pupil and we have to do a slit lamp examination. In an undilated pupil and on torchlight, we can never comment upon the grade of cataract. So we have dilated the pupil using a combination of tropicamide and phenylephrine mydriatic drug, and here we can see that the lens is imparting a yellow hue. Hence, previously I had mentioned the color of the lens as yellow. And in the left eye, we can see that the lens is appearing very opaque and white. Hence, I had mentioned the color as pearly white. Depending on the history and examination, we have come to the provisional diagnosis of right eye senile immature cataract and left eye mature cataract. So you will have to always give differential diagnosis to your provisional diagnosis, and this differential diagnosis will include conditions which have the similar presentation as your provisional diagnosis. So our differential diagnosis will be diabetic retinopathy, hypertensive retinopathy, glaucoma, mainly open angle, primary open angle glaucoma, and age-related macular degenerations. This picture I have included to explain you the slit lamp examination. So in slit lamp examination, we throw a beam of light obliquely at an angle of 60 degree, and this vertical beam of light we throw in the pupillary area. It is indicated by the two white arrows. In front of the vertical beam of light, we see a black shadow, and this is the shadow of the anterior chamber. Previously, when I told you that in slit lamp, we check the anterior chamber depth. So this is how we check it. We have to compare this the thickness of this shadow with the corneal thickness and accordingly grade the anterior chamber depth. Now this beam of light is seen cutting through the lens, which is indicated by the three white arrows, to give us the color of the nucleus or the lens. Here we see that the color is slightly green, because this picture is of a 50-year-old patient where cataract changes have started to set in. But in a younger individual, you will not see this hue. It will almost appear transparent. As the age advances and cataract sets in, the nucleus undergoes sclerosis and imparts a yellow hue. And this yellow hue goes on becoming darker and darker as nucleus sclerosis progresses. So based on this, a grading has been given of nucleus sclerosis. So NS1 is green in color, NS2 is yellow in color as seen in the second picture, NS3 is orange in color, and NS4 is brown in color, also known as brown cataract. The second picture, we can see an orangish brown color of the nucleus, hence we can grade it as NS 3 to 4. The third picture is of a mature cataract, when the cataract advances further and the whole of the nucleus and the capsule is opacified. And the fourth picture is of a hypermature cataract, when the mature cataract progresses even further. It becomes more and more white, and the cortex appears prominent because of liquefaction. Hypermature cataract can present either as Morgagnian cataract or sclerotic cataract. The first picture is that of a Morgagnian hypermature cataract, where the cortical matter liquefies and the endonucleus floats in the capsule. Here this orangish mass is the endonucleus floating in the capsule. And in sclerotic cataract, there is loss of water, due to which the cataract shrivels and shrinks into a sclerotic mass. Now the second picture is of a posterior subcapsular cataract, where we can see a cataractous plaque very close to the nodal point of the eye. As a result of this, although the rest of the lens is clear, the visual loss is very high because the opacity is very close to the nodal point of the eye, and the visual loss exaggerates when the patient is in bright light or is doing near work such as reading, due to constriction of the pupil. These kind of cataracts also produce a large amount of glare. Posterior subcapsular cataracts must be suspected in patients of uveitis and asthma who have been in a long-term prescription for oral or topical steroids. In this chart, I have divided the nature of diminution of vision into gradual and painless, sudden and painless, and diminution of vision associated with pain or acute red eye. So in our case, the patient had gradual painless diminution of vision. So the DDs would be presbyopia, age-related cataract, that is senile immature cataract, which our patient had, chronic simple glaucoma, diabetic retinopathy, hypertensive retinopathy, retinitis pigmentosa, etc. If not all, some of the causes you will have to remember and come during your exams, as it will be asked. Lastly, the management of cataract. Cataracts are to be managed surgically. There is no role of pharmacotherapy in the management of cataract. Before the patient is taken for cataract surgery, preoperative assessment has to be done, which includes examination, IOP measurement, checking the patency of the nasolacrimal duct, and IOL power calculation by A-scan biometry. We also have to see the fundus properly to rule out any retinopathies in the fundus. If the cataract is very mature or hypermature, then the fundus won't be visible by a normal lens or an ophthalmoscope. In such cases, we have to go for USG-B scan for viewing the posterior segment. Now, the surgeries available are manual small incision cataract surgery, which is a type of extracapsular cataract extraction, and phacoemulsification. Phacoemulsification is a comparatively newer procedure, and nowadays mostly phacoemulsification is preferred over manual SICS because of its incision size, which is small, and as a result the postoperative astigmatism is less. But again, phacoemulsification also has certain limitations, such as it cannot be used for too soft or too hard cataracts. These are some of the questions which I have laid down. You must be well versed with these questions if you want to score well in your exam. Okay, so this brings us to the end of case discussion for cataract. If you have any queries, convey it to us and we will try to clarify them as soon as possible. Thank you.